Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. Derek Chauvin, the murderer of George Floyd, does not deserve a pardon from Trump. It would send the wrong message at the wrong time, which is that Black lives genuinely don't matter. Now, we know many people already think that way. I get it. But let's not go back to the days when the president himself blatantly pushes such a dangerous message. Hello, everyone. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video, and I pray that you have a great day and the rest of this week. All right, so let's get into this. What am I talking about? Recently, I listened to a video of the right-wing commentator Ben Shapiro. He was requesting that Trump pardon Derek Chauvin of his federal murder conviction. Now, even if Trump pardoned Chauvin, it would not affect his state convictions. Let me just throw that out there. And I decided not to play the video or even read the transcript to avoid giving Shapiro any more shine than he already has received. In fact, Elon Musk reposted or retweeted Shapiro's request, and of course that sent it into the millions. So I'm not using my platform to give him any more shine other than what he may get from this video. So what I'm doing is I'm going to express my reaction to his offensive and reprehensible request to pardon the murderer of George Floyd. Now, before I go further, let's have a moment of silence for Mr. Floyd. Thank you. So first, I'll start by asking Black MAGA members whether you support Shapiro's request to pardon Chauvin. I'm asking you a simple question. Do you support this measure? If so, you're sick, just like Ben Shapiro and the others who would request this pardon. And if you don't support it, then my next question is, why are you supporting the other anti-Black policies of this anti-Black movement? At this point, these folks are spitting in the faces of all Blacks with their policies and this pardon request. I mean, think about it. It could have been you under Chauvin's knee or someone that you love. Time for you to do some serious, independent, and critical thinking about whether you should be a part of this type of movement as an African-American person, especially if you're an African-American man. Because Trump has you looking really foolish. Really. And we're just, 2 months into his second term. There is a lot more anti-Blackness that will come from Trump's presidency. And by the way, I'm not shilling for the Democrats because I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. But I am shilling for Jesus's kingdom that stands for both justice and righteousness, according to Psalm 89:14. All right? So, let me be clear about something. Derek Chauvin and his fellow officers lynched George Floyd. They did so in broad daylight as witnesses recorded and begged for Mr. Floyd's life. Chauvin showed no mercy, pressing his knee into Mr. Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, ignoring all his pleas for help and all the pleas and cries of the bystanders who witnessed this. It was reprehensible, sad, whatever word you want to use. As the life drained from Mr. Floyd's body, he called for his mother and said goodbye to other family members. And what was his crime? I'll tell you what it was. Being a black man in America. That was his crime. Being a black man in America. The media reported that he tried to pass a fake or counterfeit $20 bill. But I don't think the state even charged him with that. And if they did, they didn't prove it. And even if they had proved it, it would not and should not have resulted in his death. Passing a fake $20 bill in most states would be a misdemeanor, probably punishable by a fine only. Something insignificant. Again, it certainly did not deserve being choked to death or lynched the way he was. Police claimed he resisted arrest, but we saw the videotape. And what we actually saw was Mr. Floyd was apparently suffering from claustrophobia, and he panicked when officers attempted to force him into a small backseat of a small car, and he was a big man, handcuffed. So that caused him to have anxieties, and he simply begged, that they would just get a larger vehicle because he was afraid of getting in the back. His visceral reaction to being placed in the back of that car was one of panic and anxiety, not resisting. As an attorney, and even in my personal life, I've seen situations like that be avoided by some person, some cop, just having a little humanity and calling for a larger vehicle. And that would have took care of that Floyd situation, and he would still be living. The country would not have been set off into turmoil, and his families wouldn't still be grieving today, just by showing a little humanity to this black man. That's all it took. Now, let's talk about Chauvin's federal charges, since those are the ones that Shapiro wants Trump to pardon. All right, so first and most importantly, Chauvin admitted guilt. He didn't take his case to trial. He pled guilty to the charges the federal prosecutors lodged against him. So I'm not understanding what Shapiro is trying to do here. Mr. Chauvin pled guilty to those charges. And he was not without a lawyer. He had a lawyer representing him. And yet, in federal court, he admitted he violated George Floyd's civil rights and caused his death. Additionally, Chauvin appealed. He appealed. Now, here in the state of Texas, if you plead guilty to something, you typically waive your right away to appeal that agreement or that conviction. But in any event, Mr. Chauvin was shown favor by allowing him to appeal despite the fact that he pled guilty. Okay? And as a result of that appeal, a federal judge recently granted Mr. Chauvin's request to examine Mr. Floyd's heart tissue, reportedly, over objections from federal prosecutors. Now, on an unfortunate note, let me say this. A fellow inmate brutally stabbed Mr. Chauvin, causing him serious bodily injuries. So we pray that God protects him and grants him mercy. That would be more than he gave Mr. Floyd. Nevertheless, we issue that prayer on his behalf. Now let's switch our attention to the merits of the state's case or cases since Shapiro attacked the evidence in those state cases. All right, so first, the charges that the state of Minnesota lodged against Derek Chauvin were second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And he was convicted on all three. Now, what evidence did the state prosecutors use against Mr. Chauvin? Well, they used the evidence that a neutral judge admitted based on rules of evidence. The judge is the gatekeeper, and as such, he uses the rules of evidence to determine whether or not what's being offered is in fact admissible. Okay? So, what was really critical in this case was, what was the cause of death? All right, the cause of Mr. Floyd's death was, again, a key issue in the case. And basically it bottomed out to the battle of the medical experts. Both the state had its experts and the defense had their experts. Now, the defense medical expert, Dr. David Fowler, a former Maryland chief medical examiner, argued that Mr. Floyd died from a combination of pre-existing heart conditions, drug use, fentanyl to be exact, and environmental factors, not asphyxiation from Chauvin's restraint. Okay, that's what the defense expert offered as the cause of death. Okay, again, environmental factors, heart condition, drug use. Now, the prosecution's medical experts, a man named Dr. Martin Tobin, I watched his testimony. It was very compelling. He is a renowned pulmonologist, and he debunked Dr. Fowler's claims. And he demonstrated that positional asphyxia caused Mr. Floyd's death, specifically the state's medical expert, based on decades of experience as a lung doctor. He said Mr. Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck restricted his breathing. It was not, he said, the result of drug use, environmental factors, and heart conditions. He disputed that. And then the fact finders in the case, the jury, not Ben Shapiro, they believed the state's medical experts and not the defense medical expert. I've been there many times in trial, and it's basically a battle between some experts, in this case, medical experts. And the fact finders of the case, that would be the jury members, not the judge if it's a jury trial, but the jury, not spectators, not right-wing commentators, not the prosecutor, no one but the jury, who sat in there and listened to the evidence for weeks, every day listening to evidence. And they again did not buy the defense's medical experts' opinion. And keep in mind, those jury members, they were handpicked by the state and the defense. Both the state and the defense handpicked those jury members. And they were sworn to serve. They were under oath. Okay, they were Mr. Chauvin's peers. And the judge instructed them on Minnesota law. And again, where were they as the trial proceeded? In the courtroom, watching and listening all the evidence, seeing it all. And pursuant to their deliberations, they decided that the state's medical experts' opinion was the creditable and the believable opinion. And so they found Mr. Chauvin guilty on all three charges and beyond all reasonable doubt. So justice was served. However, Mr. Chauvin exercised his right to appeal, and he did appeal certain issues. And the result of that appeal was the Minnesota Appeals Court rejected his appeal and upheld his conviction. And then it was appealed to the Minnesota Supreme Court. It too rejected Mr. Chauvin's appeal and upheld his conviction. Moreover, the United States Supreme Court refused to even hear the matter. So in the state cases, the evidence appears to have been very overwhelming, just given the fact that a Minnesota Court of Appeals rejected his appeal, the Minnesota Supreme Court rejected his appeal, and the United States Supreme Court said, no, we're not even looking at it. So I went through that about the state's evidence to go after what Mr. Shapiro calls Mr. Chauvin being unjustly convicted. I don't see the injustice here. If I did, I would say so. I am a defense attorney. So I am an attorney who is typically defending the folks accused of crimes. And so I would not sit here and defend what I thought would be unjust. Once again, he had a very good trial lawyer. He had a top medical expert. He had 3 opportunities to appeal. I mean, he really got a whole lot more than many of, African-American men, especially when they're in court and when they got to go to trial. They don't get all that because oftentimes they don't have the resources for all of that. Mr. Chauvin it's my understanding that he received a lot of donations from around the country. So he was able to do every bit of that, and then he just got a whole lot of favor just being a police officer. So, no, he does not deserve a pardon from Trump. Now, what about the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's lynching? What about that? Just think about all the stuff that went down after his lynching. First, the world recoiled at how Mr. Chauvin treated Mr. Floyd. It was inhumane. And it caused protests to erupt not only in America, but around the world. Diverse groups of people, including many white Americans, took to the streets demanding police accountability and systemic reform. So Mr. Shapiro talks about the $2 billion that were spent because of the protests. He doesn't give the context. He doesn't tell the whole truth about that. And he sort of started his argument out with the protests because he knows that will probably get a rise out of Trump. Now, from the ashes of Mr. Floyd's murder, many believe the nation was at this sort of precipice of some sort of racial reckoning. I never believed it, but that's what some people were saying. Would America finally confront its deeply rooted racial injustices, its systemic racism? And the answer became very clear from the very top of the government. No. No. President Trump at that time made it pretty clear. All right? And MAGA was right on board. And what MAGA was doing basically was defending white supremacy. MAGA saw Floyd's lynching not as a tragedy, nor a call for racial justice. No, they saw it as a threat to white dominance. To them, the nationwide uprising represented lawlessness and rebellion and an attack on the status quo. So the divide between those fighting for racial justice and those clinging to white supremacy has only deepened since 2020. With Mr. Trump's reelection, angry white men feel emboldened, and they're rallying behind Trump's anti-black, anti-DEI, anti-civil rights policies and his Take Back America rhetoric. Okay? When Chauvin admitted to the guilt and the evidence in the case was reviewed by multiple courts and upheld those convictions, okay, is nothing more than a MAGA dog whistle. That's all it is. Mr. Chauvin was not treated unjustly or unfairly. He was given resources to really fight his case all the way to the highest level of our court system, to the United States Supreme Court, to the highest level in the state of Minnesota. And once again, they upheld his conviction. So what is this? Again, it's a dog whistle. It's a MAGA dog whistle. It has nothing to do with the facts of Mr. Floyd's case. Nothing. Instead, it is a symbolic strike against racial justice itself. It intends to quieten down any sort of fight for racial justice, any sort of push for racial justice. It's all a part of MAGA's plan. It's all a part of Trump's plan. And if we wanted to just make it simple, it's really no more than just plain simple hatred. So in closing, let me just say, Ben Shapiro's pardon request, it's not about the law. It's not about evidence. No. It's about appeasing the same angry white men who view any challenge to systemic racism as an existential threat to white dominance. So basically, the fight for justice continues. The fight for justice continues. And you cannot, no matter how much you want to, you cannot put your head in the sand. You cannot just overlook it and be just sort of willfully blind to what is happening here. So my prayers and deepest respect go out to the Floyd family, who just happens to be from my neck of the woods back in North Carolina. Yes. All right, so Derek Chauvin does not deserve a pardon from Donald Trump for his federal convictions, nor does he deserve a pardon in the state of Minnesota for his convictions. All right, I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Remember, stay woke.